Now, what we're going to talk about now is going to be evaluation points for taxes and subsidies. So specifically, I want to look at the videos we've already done and then to think about those videos and say, but what are the evaluation things that I can bring into those? So, for example, we need to, in our exam, draw the graphs, analyse them, talk about why governments might intervene. For example, we've talked about why governments will intervene in demerit goods or why they will intervene to increase the quantity supplied and consumed for merit goods. But we need to then say, but what if other things happen, or will it always work, or do all these taxes and subsidies depend on anything? So I've labelled 4 here. These are the 4 kind of basic ones I would stick to if you're stuck for any others. These are the stock answers I'd always go to if I was stuck. So one of the first ones is looking at taxes in particular and subsidies, but in this case I would mainly use it for taxes, would be elasticities. Now what you can say with elasticities is the government may want to intervene by taxing demerit goods such as cigarettes. However, it depends on the effect of the government taxes will depend on how elastic or inelastic the demand in the market is. And we can see that over here. So, for example, the government is taxing for cigarettes in an inelastic market. So what happens here is because consumer demand is inelastic, the tax the government puts on the good is majoritively paid by the consumer, and the rest of it's paid by the producer. The consumer's paying the price increase and the producer's paying the rest. So in an inelastic market, what the government's actually done is put a tax on the good, but the consumer is paying all of that tax. Now what you can say in your exam is say, is that fair? Is it fair that consumers will pay all of the tax and take on all of that burden that the government is putting on the market? You might say it's fair, you might say it's not fair, but it's an evaluative point to use. And at the same time, in an inelastic market, by putting a tax on it, are you actually going to change the consumption patterns of consumers? By putting a tax on cigarettes, if they're addictive, then the price change in cigarettes actually is not going to affect consumers buying and consuming cigarettes. So government taxes might not make a difference at all. And we can see that and compare it to an elastic demand curve and show that the tax paid by consumers and producers is fairly equal. So you can talk about with elasticities both who pays the tax, consumers or producers, and whether that's fair for consumers or producers to pay more or less than the other. But also you can talk about the effectiveness of a government tax by reducing the quantity consumed in the market. Because as we can see here, in an inelastic market, the quantity has gone down only a tiny amount to the actual price increase that has happened. But in the elastic market, the quantity has changed a lot here. It's gone down a lot in the elastic market and not down very much so in the inelastic market. So to get the top marks, you need to understand this fully and maybe even, if it's appropriate, add these diagrams in to your answer if there is enough time. The second one is to talk about government aims. Now, a great one to talk about, again, is taxes. And with the inelastic and elastic market, you need to say, well, how, in this case, you have a government taxing cigarettes in an inelastic market, and if their aim is to get tax revenue in, and they can use that tax revenue on healthcare and sorting out the problems, that's fine, because they will get tax revenue in an inelastic market, because the consumption won't go down much, but the price has gone up, and the taxes they get in, therefore, are going to be fairly high. But you need to say, with government aims, if the government aim is to reduce consumption of cigarettes and not just to get tax revenue in, then taxing these goods is not a good option, because they are only reducing consumption by a tiny amount. And actually what they're doing is causing consumers to pay a lot more, and therefore it would affect consumers a lot, but not actually help society a lot. So you need to talk about government aims. What are they trying to do? Just get tax revenue in, or actually solve the problem? And then you could say, following on from that, there might be other forms of government intervention instead of taxing if that's not a viable option, such as regulation and education, so non-market regulation and non-market government intervention. A third one to use, I would say, would be opportunity cost. If you are subsidising the market, so say gym or healthcare or education, that money that you're putting into the market to try and increase the quantity consumed of a merit good, you could argue that that money would be better spent elsewhere. For example, if you said the government would subsidise all the gyms to get people to go to the gym and be healthier and have a more productive society, they might be subsidising inefficient gyms that don't work very well, and they might need to use that money elsewhere in more kind of markets where it'd be better for society, such as education, defence, healthcare, that kind of thing. So opportunity cost is something to really think about as well. And lastly, something to get your head around, especially with the new syllabus, is behavioural theories. So we need to remember that everything that we are looking at here is based upon free market economics. So looking at supply and demand and the free market neoclassical theories. So in your exam, you would say, we are basing our graphs and our government intervention on the free market. And we need to remember that if we tax a good or if we subsidise a good, it doesn't automatically mean that consumers would consume more by subsidising it and making the price less. And equally, it doesn't mean that consumers will consume less if you tax it and put the price up. Because of behavioural economics and behavioural theories, we can therefore say that consumers are not necessarily rational, and they might just do whatever they want and not act in a way that you would imagine they would act by putting the taxes or the subsidies in place. So behavioural theories and behavioural economics is something I would definitely put into your exam as well. So using all these four as your stock answers, there is plenty more, and I have given you plenty more in lesson. But these four, if you're stuck, I would always go to for your evaluation marks in your exam.